So everybody, hi, welcome, and thank you for being here for today's webinar, Maximize Your ROI with Dynamics 365 Finance and Supply Chain Management Update 10.0.45. I'm Sebastian Anderson with the Licensing and Database Desk here at Avantiico. We've got a great lineup of experts with us today, each bringing valuable insights to help you prepare for this update. Director of Managed Services and Strategic Initiatives, Chris Barbera, will kick things off with a breakdown of the 2025 One Version Update cadence and best practices. D365 Finance Consultant and Director of Business Applications Consulting, Brandon Nash, will walk us through the key new and enhanced features in D365 Finance. And Senior D365 Supply Chain Consultant, Michael Kavanaugh, will cover the latest enhancements and updates in supply chain management. Chris will be taking over shortly, but before we dive into today's session, I'd love to share some of the other exciting webinars we have coming up. First, on September 18th at 10 a.m. Pacific, join us for Dynamics 365 F&SCM Licensing and Security Enforcement. Starting November 1st, unlicensed Dynamics 365 F&SCM users will be blocked from core applications. This webinar breaks down what's changing, how to assess your current license setup, and what steps to take now to stay compliant and avoid costly disruptions. If you're managing Dynamics licenses or involved in renewal decisions, this session will help you reduce risk, control costs, and ensure uninterrupted access for your team. Then, on September 23rd at 10 a.m. Pacific, don't miss Freight Invoice Automation. Boost ROI with automated reconciliation in Dynamics 365 Finance and SCM. In this session, we'll show you how our solution for automating freight reconciliation within Dynamics 365 helps recover lost revenue and eliminate manual audit bottlenecks while integrating seamlessly with your TMS. Learn how to gain real-time visibility, catch hidden overcharges, and bill back clients or carriers with confidence. And finally, coming late October, AI Builder plus Power Automate, a new era of process automation. Learn how Microsoft's AI Builder combines the capability of artificial intelligence with the flexibility of Power Platform, unlocking intelligent workflows, automating repetitive tasks, and adapting to your business needs. You'll see the game-changing impact of this tech through real customer use cases and get practical guidance on creating AI workflows tailor-made for your requirements. We will have more events and webinars added to the calendar, so do be on the lookout for those. And be sure to let us know in the chat if there's anything you would really like to see from us in the future. All registration links for these events will be available in the chat, on our website, and within this slide deck. One last note. As we go through this presentation, do not hesitate to pop any questions you have into the chat, and we will address them in the open Q&A at the tail end of the webinar or in direct email follow-up. And with that, Chris, take it away.
All right, great. Well, good morning, everybody, or afternoon. I think we have some global audience here today, which is great. I also see some familiar names in the list, so welcome to some of our managed services customers as well. So my name is Chris Barbera. As Sebastian mentioned, I run our managed services here at Avantiico. Been with the company about 11 years now. It's been a while, and with the product about 15 years between D365 and legacy versions. And as we already introduced, we have a great set of team members on to go through these individual updates, both in the finance area and supply chain. Before we get into those individual updates, though, I'm just going to take a few minutes, especially for some people that may be more new to the service update process with Microsoft, to go through how Microsoft announces updates, some of the key concepts around service updates, provide you our recommended schedule specifically for implementing 10.0.4.5, and then just briefly about how Avantiico can help you kind of plan out your updates over the coming year. 10.0.4.5 will come out this Friday. They sometimes release it early. I was checking the boards just a few minutes before this call, and I didn't see anything announced, so I believe it should be out this Friday. Again, probably not out earlier, at least from what they haven't announced anything so far today on that. So, but the official release date is Friday. All right, so let's first talk about how Microsoft announces what's coming out. So Microsoft does a 6-month roadmap called Wave 1 and Wave 2 that explains what's coming out in D365 Finance and Supply Chain, as well as Power Platform, the Dynamics 365 Customer Service, Field Service, and many other products. The next release starts in October. It's already been announced, but the actual implementation of that will start occurring in October. So when we're talking about these service updates, that's essentially the implementation of what's been put in the roadmap. So they'll announce it, and then these service updates actually get that information into your system that you can actually start using. There is a very useful planner at aka.ms/release planner, and that's just a shortcut for an actual Microsoft site that will help you go through and understand what's coming out for Microsoft and the dates that it will come out. This is kind of a screenshot of what it will look like. So it gives you kind of business value of the new feature, the feature details, and then you'll see some dates here on the right on when it's planning to be released. I will say that sometimes these dates are a bit aspirational for Microsoft, so sometimes these things get pushed a bit, especially when it's in preview before it goes into the main release, but it is still a very useful tool. You can also mark which changes you're interested in following, and then when you go back to the site, it will keep that curated list there for you. Okay. So a good tool just for kind of getting an idea of what's out on the roadmap as well when you're doing your planning for the year. All right, so now on to the individual updates. So there are 4 service updates a year. They call them 10.0. In this case, we're going to be doing 4.5. They just increment the number. They've also implemented a newer naming convention that will be calendar year, say like 25, Q, whatever it will be. In this case, they count this one as Q4. For any of our managed services customers, this is your last update for the year. And they're technically, there is one that comes out on December 27th, but we don't really start those until January of next year. The schedule has been released all the way through 2026. They were a bit slow this year until about last update. They only had the schedule out through October of this year. But what we do know from looking at the updated schedule through the end of next year is that essentially the cadence is going to be very similar to this year, still be 4 updates, and they're still going to have about the same amount of time to get those things in. It is important to note, though, that you can only skip 1 update. So if you have not taken version 44, which means you would be on 43 right now, this update will be required for you. You can skip, again, a maximum of 1 update at a time. So essentially 2 updates are the minimum mandatory for every customer. Now, about 50% of our customers take more than 2 updates a year. And if you take all 4 updates, you have a lot more flexibility when you start and end the updates. But the example I'm going to show you today is assuming that 45 is mandatory for you. It's very important not to wait until the auto updates. Auto updates can cause issues with your ISVs. They can look at if your custom code may have issues or interfaces. So it is very risky to take an auto update. None of our managed services customers do that because you really don't know what's going to happen. You really need to put together a plan, and I'll kind of show you some of the dates we recommend for that. I like to say an auto update is great for your iPhone, not so great for enterprise applications, right? The cost to do one of these service updates, you could lose in lost revenue and opportunity probably within a few hours of having your production system down. So it's very important to do the planning for these. Okay, so here's, if we look out specifically for 45, I'll give you some dates from Microsoft. Now, it's important to know that this assumes that your Microsoft Lifecycle Services has the most optimal settings for your auto update cadence, and you've paused out your updates as far as possible. Okay, if you haven't done those things, you could put a question in the chat. We can help you out with that, even perhaps have a quick call with you to take a look at it if you're not a customer of ours now. If you are a managed service customer, don't worry, we're already doing this for you, so you don't have to worry about it. Okay. So this update will be released this Friday on 9/12, and then there will be 2 auto update windows, one starting in mid-October and then one in early November. Now, if this update is mandatory for you, you can go into LCS and pause this first update window, but you cannot pause the second one. In other words, if you don't do something, your system's got to auto update on these dates, assuming your LCS is set up properly. So this is what we recommend here for your update. We typically suggest starting the Monday after the update is released. In this case, that would be 9/15. But you should already be reaching out to your ISV partners if you have any ISVs like DocCentric, FastPath, Blue Horseshoe, small package solution, SK Soft, SK Global, and asking them, hey, I'm going to be moving up to 10.045. Are you releasing a new update for compatibility so you can start getting that moving with your ISV partner? Now, if they are a Microsoft partner, an official ISV with Microsoft, under their rules, they're required to have that update ready on the same day that the application is generally released. We don't see 100% compliance with that, but generally the data should be available for you by 9/15. It's important to get that information so that, of course, you can put in the latest compatible update. Then there's about a 6-week period before we recommend having the production target update of no later than that weekend around 10/26. Now you may ask, well, why do we suggest that you are in production by 10/26 if the auto update window for your sandbox is not until 11/8? We just have to look back to a recent time. I think this was middle of last year. If you guys recall that CrowdStrike issue that took down a whole bunch of systems, we had a lot of customers that were planning to go to production on a service update on that weekend. Now, thankfully, their D365 didn't go down under that, but a lot of their other systems did go down, and their IT departments were very much focused on getting those resolved over the weekend and really couldn't handle doing this update at the same time. But that 2-week buffer allowed us to have a contingency where we could recover from that, do those production updates the next weekend, and still avoid these auto update windows from Microsoft. So just remember, there's always things that go wrong, even in big production systems, and it's very important to have some contingency time in there, which is what we recommend for all of our customers. Okay, so if you are looking to look up the changes for yourself, you can see that this will give you a list of all of the hyperlinks. As you can see, it's spread out all over Microsoft Learn. There are many different links, and that's really why we do this webinar, as well as the highlight deck we can provide you afterwards. There are hundreds and hundreds of updates. They're spread out all across the Microsoft Learn. So we really go through all of these and prepare the consolidated list here that we're going to go through with you both on finance and supply chain today. Okay. So some things you'll see in the highlight deck you can receive afterwards is we'll kind of go through some of these key features. These are from 10.040 as an example, but we'll send you over this. What is it, how it will help, how it's implemented, some screenshots and things like that as well. Okay, and we'll go through some of that today. So lastly, just want to talk about if you are not a managed services customer currently, and you are interested in getting a roadmap put together for when you're can take your service updates over the next year. We were happy to have a collaboration call with you with no obligation. We'll review your current settings in LCS, including your pausing and your cadence. We'll talk with you about your busy seasons, and then we'll put together a suggested roadmap for you all the way through the end of 2026. That discovery call usually, and looking at LCS, usually takes 45 minutes to an hour, and then we'd set a follow-up call with you for probably a short 30-minute call to go over the updated roadmap and recommendations for the upcoming year for you. Again, there's no obligation to do that. If you are interested in that, you can just type in roadmap in the chat, and we'll get back to you on it. If you are a managed services customer, now that the schedule's been published out all the way through next year, we will be in contact with you within the next 30 days or so to put together an annual schedule for you. If you're a managed services customer now, this probably looks pretty familiar for you on the bottom of the screen. All right, with that, let's get to the very important detail. I think we are starting with finance today. All right, the finance highlights. So Brandon, that's off to you, and I'll stop sharing.
Awesome. Thank you, Chris, for the intro. Appreciate it. And welcome, everybody. Good morning. My name is Brandon Nash. As Sebastian introduced me, I'm a senior consultant with Avantiico, as well as Director of Business Application Consulting. And I'm going to talk about the finance highlights, finance new features for the 10.0.45 update. I'm going to be talking in detail about a couple of important functions I think that would help the day-to-day business operations for customers. Let's go ahead and move forward with the with the list of slides that are going to be coming up here. So basically, what I want to be talking about, I'm going to be talking about something that's being added to the accounts receivable area. I'll be talking about something that's related to fixed asset, particularly asset leasing, and then also accounts payable. There are also a number of different features that have come out already or that are going to be coming out with this new version. But these I think are the ones that are a little closer to home in terms of your everyday usage. And starting with this one here in accounts receivable, there's a new logging framework within D365 that's going to allow you to manage your customer invoices for both sales orders and free text invoice tracking. This is a preview feature, so you do have to be mindful of the fact that it's going to be available for your testing purposes, and there may be some updates that are going to come along the lines of new functionality that's associated with this once it is actually no longer in preview mode. But the cool thing about this feature and what it allows you to do, it allows you to track the life cycle of the events that are happening in your customer invoices, both on the sales order as well as on a free text invoice. And what I mean by that is when you get posting failures, postings as well as failures on your customer invoice, sometimes you have to navigate, well, not sometimes, all the time, you usually have to navigate into the system to try to find out what exactly went wrong and why that error message occurred. Well, now with this feature, particularly for your sales orders as well as your free text invoices, you now have a framework within the workspace. So when you first come into the office and you're looking at your invoicing, you now have a framework where you can see exactly what orders have been posted or what orders or free text invoices have received error messages. And you can dive into those right there directly from the workspace. And from the workspace, you can go directly to the order. So now there's no navigating through the menu. So it's just another opportunity to save clicks, have better auditing, have better tracking, and so on. So what I want to do now is I'm going to share my screen and we're going to talk about how this new feature works and some of the benefits that you'll see when you use it, in action. So here I'm going to take the screen share for
Take the
just a
reins.
moment and present my screen. Sebastian, can you guys see my screen here?
You're coming through clear
Yeah.
and loud.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, it's looking
Okay,
good.
great. Great. So,
Awesome.
so as you can see here, so just for testing purposes, right, I'm gonna create a scenario where we have a sales order invoice and a free text invoice, and I want to be able to generate the error message. And one of the easier ways to generate an error message on one of these is to close like a period, for example. So I'm gonna create. I have some sales orders and a free text invoice already created for the period of August. So I'm just gonna navigate really quickly over to my general ledger, and this is not necessarily relevant in terms of the functionality. What I'm doing here is I'm just setting up how an error message will come through. So I'm going to go into my ledger calendar and go to my August period. And for my USMF company, I'm just going to put it on hold. And basically what this is going to do is when I try to process my sales order invoice as well as my free text invoice, it will give me an error message that the period is closed. And that's what we want to see happen when it comes to this process. So now that that's done, you can see we're on August 1st and our August period is closed. So let me navigate over to so what would basically happen is you would have your end users that are working and creating transactions and so on, and they're going to post an order, right? So I have a sales order here that's already been delivered. It's kind of already been processed. And now we're at the stage where we're creating an invoice, okay? So let me go over here and go to generate an invoice for an amount. And you may have invoices that are running in batch, right? I have many customers that don't do this manually. They have the invoice process that, either processes them overnight. They have batch jobs that run throughout the day, so that sales orders that get created, they have a batch process that will process the delivery or the packing slip and so on. So as you can see here, when we look at it just happen in real time, we get an error message. Now, if those transactions are being posted overnight, for example, and they run into errors, you're just going to be expecting to see those invoices that are posted. And that's where this new framework comes in. So when I come in throughout the day, or I come in first thing in the morning and my batch process has ran in the background to post my customer invoices, I want to come into my customer invoicing workspace here. And now I can come in and see my sales order posting history. And I can see that I've had some history. As you can tell, I have done some testing, but I've got errors. So the first thing I want to do is I want to look and see, well, what is this error? And I can click right here. I can see it's my sales order I'm working on. It gives me an execution date. So although I tried to set this up with a close period in August, it's giving you a real-time execution date. It's giving you the sales order information, customer account, and all that. But what's most important is it gives you the error details right here. And that's the key in terms of being able to quickly assess what is going on with the orders. Why is there an issue, right? I have a simple example in terms of a ledger period, but you may have financial dimension issues. You may have a record issue with your customer in terms of how you're managing their credit or whatever the case may be in terms of your specific example. But the key here is that within 2 clicks of coming into, and I say 2 clicks in terms of starting from the main page when you first walk in, click on customer invoice, click on the tab and see the error details. Right away, we can see that we have an issue. And the same thing can occur with your free text invoices. So I'm going to just back out real quick, create an issue with a free text invoice and do the same thing. So bear with me here. I've got a free text invoice that's not posted in my period of 8/1. We go to try to post this. Again, these are processes that would happen in the background most likely. If you are doing them manually, obviously you would see them and address them right here. But again, we have some issues. Period is closed. So now if I'm coming in for the first time for the day and I go to my customer invoicing, same thing. I want to look at my free text invoices, what has posted. I can see 2 of them were posted earlier today. 1 of them has an error. Now I want to see those error details, and it gives me that detail right away. And that's the benefit of being able to use this new functionality that's going to be coming out in 10.0.45. Like I said, it's a preview. It's in preview right now. So there could be some more advanced functionality that comes by the time it's ready for general availability. But just be on the lookout for when this comes in for your testing purposes. See how it works, particularly with your batch jobs and your batch processing, where you have some of the automation happening for your sales order and free text invoice posting. Okay. Let me go ahead and back out. And before I go on to my next topic, so I don't forget, I want to change my period back to open. So let's go to my ledger calendar, go to August, change that back to on hold, open. Okay, let's head back to the presentation and talk about the next topic coming up, which is going to have to do with asset leasing. Now, asset leasing is it's not a new function in D365, but it's not always very highly used, at least in terms of the experiences that I've had dealing with certain customers. But one of the things that they have added to this functionality is a workflow when it comes to lease impairment. So an asset lease where maybe you have like a right of use asset. So you don't necessarily own the asset, but you're leasing it, maybe some type of machinery or equipment or a piece of property that you have the right of lease for. What this new function in D365 is going to allow you to do is it allows you to not just have be able to process an impairment, but what it allows you to do is it allows you to have a workflow associated with that. And I'm going to give you some context in terms of what it looked like before compared to what it looks like with this new feature in 10.0.45. But basically, what you now have is you now have a workflow that gives you a little more detail when it comes to being able to have an approval process when you're going to write down one of your assets, and in this case, a right of use asset. Again, when you have approval workflow, there's consistency, there's controls, there's governance, there's visibility in terms of who authorized the approval, why are we writing down the approval, and so on. And so I'm going to walk you through what that process looks like here. As you can see in the screenshot of the presentation, there is a preview function on here. That is also another feature that was added, I think, at the end of last year. So I've included that in here just so you can see the detail. So the first thing I want to do, I'm going to take the screen share here. Let's go
Go right
back
ahead.
into D365. And I'm gonna go let's go over here. So one of the things that was done in previous versions, so I'm going into a different environment just to show you what it looks like from terms of the workflow, in terms of the impairment without workflow, because it's very plain, it's very straightforward, and once you hit OK, you've written down the value of your asset. So if I go in here and really quickly, let's just take this one here, go to our asset leasing book. When I click impairment, and again, this is not on 10.0.45. This is our previous version of 10.0.44. It's very straightforward, right? You put in the impairment amount, it gives you a transaction date, you hit OK, and that's done. In 10.0.45, I'm going to navigate over to my asset leases. I have a machine here that I already have, a piece of equipment. It's got an asset leasing agreement. I've got some transactions that have already been posted against it. Okay, now when I go to click on the impairment button here, now you see a whole lot of detail, right? And so now when I'm going to take this asset that has a current value of $21,584, if I want to write this down, let's say that the machine, when I first got it, it was 24,000. We've had a couple of depreciation periods, a couple of asset leasing invoices associated with it. And, now I've done some evaluation on it, and it's $5,000 less with the remaining amount of periods to owe on it. Here I can click preview and I can see exactly what this is going to do to my asset, right? Is that now this asset that I have the right of use for, the value of it has dropped down just based on the fact that it might be some outdated equipment and what have you. And now I can see exactly what that's going to do to my transaction. I can see the debit and credit postings. But most importantly, with this new feature, I now have a submit button. So that way we have that control and consistency that is going to force us as a business to track what changes are we making, right? Writing down, and you put in your comment if you're used to working with right of use. If you're used to working with workflows, you can optionally put in workflow to submit and manage that. Now, that's going to go through the workflow process, and that will eventually update as usual, and I'll have the ability to process that workflow. And where you see that now is this feature here with the new functionality is this lease impairment menu item that takes you in here, and now you can see the workflow that is in review. And because I've got myself assigned to it, now I can approve it. So I know this asset is going to be written down. And what's going to happen here is you're going to see that this asset will now have a new value. There's some new functionality in there that will allow us to process this going forward. A couple of key things to take note of, especially if you do use asset leases and you have right of use properties that you need to be able to manage. Once you process this impairment, now you have a new value to your asset. You have the terms or the periods that are remaining. You have to be able to process those transactions again. And I'm going to show you what happens in here after this gets approved, something that you need to do. We won't walk through it just because of timing purposes, but there's a wizard that you need to run in order to get your asset back and ready for transactional purposes. So here now you can see it's approved. If I go back to my asset, my right of use asset here for my machinery and click on the details, when I go to my books, and this is key, is now if I wanted to click create a vendor invoice because it's the following month and I want to do a transaction, I can't create the journal. And this is where it's very important in any of your transactions where you want to create the depreciation schedule for the next period and so on. You cannot create the journal at this point because the asset has been reduced, and you can see the new value as far as the excuse me, asset transactions. So what you now have to be able to do is you have to be able to go and run your adjustment wizard. And when you run this adjustment wizard, just like all the other wizards within D365, is you go through this process to be able to re-up or restart your asset right of use. And that happens through this process and ask you for a bunch of details. What's the modification date? What's the start date? Or the modification and the posting date, and so on. So I would update this, and now I would process my right of use asset and move forward with the next period. So like I said, we won't go into that detail, but that's another function within D365 in terms of day-to-day use. That's going to be a very valuable tool for your business if you're using right of use assets on a regular basis. The last piece that I want to demonstrate, and we'll go back to the presentation here, is in the purchase order default description process. So this is a new parameter within D365 that they've just added, where it's an enhancement that is going to be available by default. It's just a matter of whether or not you parameterize it and use it going forward. I'm not sure if any of you or all of you are familiar with default descriptions, but you would normally put in a default description and be able to have that process after you process a transaction, such as a purchase order or a vendor invoice. You can then have that show up in your ledger or in your vendor transactions as far as the description goes. What this parameter allows you to do is it allows you to always use default descriptions. So what that means is when you turn on the default description functionality, or you turn on this particular function, the purchase order or the vendor invoice that you process is going to always use the default description, regardless as if you put a value into the description on your invoice. So what does that look like in action, right? Let's go back to our purchase order, or let's go back into D365. And let me just bring that back to today. And I'm going to navigate to my purchase orders. So in accounts payable, all purchase orders. Here I have a purchase order that's been fully received already. I'm going to generate an invoice, and I already have, very quickly, before I do that, let me just show you my default description that is already set up. So I have a default description for my purchase order invoice that's going to use the voucher number, and it's going to use a value in the customer reference field. So when I go to process the invoice associated with this purchase order, I would expect to see the voucher number as well as this value when I post the invoice. So let me go in to generate my invoice. And what this parameter is forcing me to do is if for one reason or another you were to have put a description into the invoice of your purchase order and you are thinking, oh, this is the value that I'm going to expect to see, that's not necessarily going to be the case. So we'll just put an invoice number in here and we'll say testing for 10.0.45. So even if I put a value in that invoice description, which would show up in the ledger, this will go to a brief workflow because it's just set up like that in our demonstration or in our system. When that workflow gets processed and the invoice gets posted, what we'll see is we'll see that a value that is in my default description show up and not the value that I entered. So let's go back a screen. So we'll refresh here. So now we have this pending invoice that's associated with this. All right, we'll just take that. Update has been canceled. So as you can see, my workflow, I have the workflow set up so that it automatically posts. So I already have an invoice journal set up here. So if I go back to my vendor master record for this vendor, and I go to my vendor's transactions, and I see my invoice, now you can see, even though I put a value in there for this Acme test invoice, where I said it was testing for 10.0.45, no matter what, it automatically takes the value as well as it took the form, not the voucher. It took the form ID, which is the invoice, and it took what I put in the customer reference. So this is another functionality there. If you're using default descriptions and you want to be able to have those bring in some information related to the vendor invoice or the purchase order, this is a functionality that you would want to use going forward. So those are a couple of features that I think are going to be super helpful in your day-to-day use in terms of the new features in 10.0.45. Other features that are available, it was a big update as far as electronic reporting. There's a lot of different features in electronic reporting that are going to be coming out, and I'll show you those here in just a second. Sebastian will bring up the list of the different new features that are coming out with in finance for the electronic reporting functionality in D365. Electronic reporting, you do have to have somewhat of a knowledge base when it comes to not just understanding the reporting layouts and the reporting functions, but also some of the code that needs to be updated when it comes to using the electronic reporting functions. You can go ahead to the next slide, Sebastian, and that'll just give the audience a list of, let's go ahead and keep moving forward. We'll pass on those. Yeah, so these features here, electronic reporting, there's a lot of different functionality within the PDF conversions. And I just recommend that if you're using electronic reporting to kind of dive into those and see what is of value to you in your business. And with that being said, I will pass it over to Michael Kavanaugh for supply chain management.
Sounds good. Thank you for that, Brandon. All right, so with that, I'll go ahead and start getting into the supply chain management updates for 1045. Now, the first one we're going to talk about here actually isn't so much associated to 1045, but more of an update that has been, you may have seen this on your mobile device, or have seen news about it, but the warehouse management app is moving to what's called version 4. The general availability for this, I believe, just became available at the end of June. So you can now actually download and update version 4. So what is version 4? How is it different from version 3? And what do you have to plan and consider for if you have devices currently on version 3? So first off, the reason they're going to version 4 is because they're changing the background architecture behind the app in the first place. I'm not an expert on this, but what they did is they swapped from, I think it's called Xamarin. It's a Microsoft-supported app architecture that they no longer support, and they moved to one that's called React Native, and it's supported by Meta Platforms. It's one of their architectures they use for app development. So it's moved to a different architecture, which is why they're doing this major change from version 3 to version 4. Now, what does it get us? So there's a couple improvements that come along with the app, and I'll show some of these in just a little bit. Some of them are nominal. We'll say, like, for example, you have different color themes, you have different sound themes. I'll show you those. I was playing around with some of the sound themes. They have things like robots and cats and things like that, and it's kind of weird when your app is meowing at you. But
in the warehouse.
In the warehouse, yep. So.
Okay.
Start associating cat meowing with errors that are occurring.
Very different kind of management.
Very much so. So there's things like that, and I'll show you those. But also, they give you kind of advanced diagnostics as well, which is very, very nice. That'll be one of the things I show you here. Now, one of the screenshots you also see here is you can now, there's kind of improved camera functionality with this app as well, where you can actually scan multiple barcodes at once, and the system will say, well, be able to identify each of those and say, okay, I just captured multiple barcodes. Which one do you want me to use? And that's when you're using the camera, for example. So they kind of made that more accessible for you to use. So a couple other notes just about it. Right now, version 4 is not available on iOS. iOS will be available, at least they're projecting it to be available at the end of November. For Windows, if you have your app installed on a Windows operating system, there is a couple minor tweaks that you need to make to the app registration that you currently have set up in your Azure portal. Just a couple minor tweaks just on the custom redirect URI, but you can look that information up when you make that switch. But the switch to version 4 is actually quite easy. You just have to download it, update it, and on the device, and then go through a one-time reauthorization. So you have to re-log in, whether using username, password, or device code. You'll just have to do that once, and then you're reauthorized and ready to go. Except for what I mentioned there with the Windows system. So Android doesn't have any requirements like that. It's just the one-time reauthorization. You can operate some devices on version 3 and some devices on version 4. That's no problem. Customizations that occurred in version 3 will port right over to version 4. There's going to be no issues with those. Connection settings are preserved, so it's a very easy update. So with that said, let me go ahead and share my screen, and I will show a little bit of what this app looks like. Okay. Are we able to see here?
It's looking good.
All right, sounds good. So it looks very much the same. It has a lot of the same settings as well. You know, if I go into the settings here, it's a lot of the same options. That we do have color themes now, so we can play around with color themes. We can play around with color modes that we did have light and dark in version 3, but now we can go to dark. We can have it be automatic. We can change, you know, so all types of color themes. So good enough there. As I mentioned earlier, there is a sound theme now. So again, bird, clock, jazz, laser, sitar. I don't know why there's so many, but they're there for you. And then a couple other things down below here. Actually, no, these are all there on the previous thing, so that's not what I meant to show. But what I wanted to show here is if I log out and I go to change connection and go to my setup connection, this is where I can actually scroll down to diagnostics. So in the diagnostics, we have a couple different options here where we can analyze Wi-Fi, we can do test scans with our barcodes, and we can also do something called the local log view. And I'll show you a couple of these here in a second. But with the analyze Wi-Fi, now you can run network diagnostics, and it'll connect to a bunch of different servers, give you latencies, and let you know that everything's okay. So that's very nice to have that. And then also in the local log view, you get an actual human readable log for every single action that this device has performed, which is very, very nice. So if you're ever tracking down, like, what were you doing on the device when X went wrong? Now we can look at the local log view, we can save it, we can go through this and explain, and it'll tell us exactly what they did, timestamps, all that stuff. So much better logging, much better troubleshooting on this device, but otherwise mostly the same. So different colors, different sounds, enhanced Wi-Fi, but it's just now on a new architecture, and that's pretty much what's in version 4 there. So with that, I'll get you back to the PowerPoint.
Right.
And forgive me just 1 second here. I'm just having some headphone issues. I just need to plug in real quick. Give me 5 seconds here. Just got to plug my headphones in so they don't drop on me.
It's all good. We'll give everyone a nice, beautiful look of the inventory management slide. A little preview there for you.
Okay, thank you so much for that. Okay, so the next thing I want to kind of cover here is something called advanced quality management. So this advanced quality management is kind of a combination of a bunch of different individual features within D365. It is not its own module, so these are just kind of these features kind of all around the system. Now, there already is quality management within D365, so this is kind of just enhancing it. It's adding additional features to that. So what you see on the slide here is there's a bunch of little blue arrows there that each have a feature, and I'll talk through a couple of those here. So for example, starting at the top there, they now have a CAPA, which is a corrective and preventative action case management, where they allow you to create these cases from all over different areas of the system, and you get the ability to plan, track, and analyze those cases through a bunch of different workspaces that they've added to the system for that as well. Another example of something that's been added here is a flexible sampling plan. If anyone's been using quality management in the past, there is our sampling plans already in the system, but they're very rigid. With a flexible sampling plan, as items pass these quality sampling plans, you can actually relieve some of the strictness of those sampling plans, so it can become less and less strict as items continue to pass it to make it a little bit more efficient. They've also given you ability to skip certain types of lot tracing and things like that. In the next section there, I wanted to cover a little bit about production dispensing. So in the digitized manufacturing section. So now with production dispensing, what they allow you to do is they've created kind of an addition to the production picking journal, where you can actually now record what's actually been dispensed out to the production order and what was actually used. So if you're using hazardous or sensitive materials, you might have a certain amount of material issued out to a production order where only a certain percentage that was actually used. With production dispensing as well, you do get to, there's some security applied to that as well, where you can have certain users that are allowed to do this. And when they actually go in and record these results, you may even require something called an electronic signature. These electronic signatures are kind of used all throughout advanced quality management. And it's a fairly new feature to D365 where there could be a separate password, a separate certificate that a user has to get. And they actually have to enter that into the system whenever they do certain types of actions like production dispensing. So there's now really no doubt that some other user didn't do this. It was that user, the user that was actually authorized to do this type of activity. So that's production dispensing. Just down to my notes here just a bit. Other things I wanted to talk about here, the approved customer list, though I will demonstrate that in just a second, as well as they've also improved the ability to enter test results on quality orders. They've made a little bit more efficient and kind of redesigned some of those screens. So a number of different improvements on quality management that came out with 45 here. All right, so one of the things I wanted to show here was the approved customer lists. So let me go ahead and do that. Let me go and share my screen. Now, give me a second here. All right, so what I wanted to show here, let me get into a sales order. Now, if anyone's familiar with the approved vendor lists that have been in place for a long time, D365 allows you to say which vendors are authorized to sell you, specific goods. It's a very similar concept here on the customer side of things, where we get to set up groups, or we can set up in this table here what customers, specific customers, or what all customers are allowed or that we're allowed to sell them. In the past, there was a way to kind of do this where we wanted to restrict certain items to certain customers, but you had to use filter codes in the system to do that. And anybody who's tried that, it was a very difficult setup that didn't really quite give you the results that you wanted. It was kind of a hard stop for any other customer that wasn't part of these items that had these codes associated to them. So it was a really a good implementation of that functionality. It was kind of a workaround. But now with the approved customer list, it's very simple. So you have this form here where you can set up, again, different groups, approved customer groups. You can set up specific customers here, and you can say which items they're allowed to purchase, or sorry, you're allowed to sell them. You can also control through parameters, whether it's just a warning or it's a hard stop as well. So once we do this, so I've set up a customer group here. It's called an approved customer group with a group of products called hazardous items. And I've also added some additional items on there. But if I go to one of these customers that is part of this group, what I can do now in my sales order, so Forest Wholesalers, for example, is part of this group. When I add a line, there is also a parameter that says, well, when I hit my item number dropdown, should I just show approved items? And right now I have that enabled. So you can see here approved items. Here are the approved items that I'm allowed to sell this customer. So these approved customer lists, the purpose of this was within the advanced quality management portion that you just saw. And the idea here is if there's certain hazardous or sensitive materials that you can only sell to specific customers, you want to be able to restrict that. But I've had a lot of requirements from a lot of clients that have said, I want some way to at least warn when I'm selling something to a customer that I normally wouldn't do. So this allows you to do that as well. You don't have to implement the other parts of quality management to do this. This is kind of a separate setup, so you can use these approved lists. So from here, I can select my item, and then it's normal from that point on. So that's the approved customer list. I'm going to pass back over. Give me a second here. Trying to get my... Doesn't feel like coming back here. I'm trying to get my... Why don't you steal the screen share for me? It's not letting me drop the screen share.
Oh, goodness. Well, I can go ahead and see about perhaps stealing it back, if that would be helpful.
Yeah, go ahead and try there. Actually, I can do it there.
Go.
Okay.
Take us back to the top here. There we go.
Okay. So the next one here that I want to go into was a new function that they've made available with 45 here called pairing transfer order lines with a sales order line. So with this, what I'll show, and I will demonstrate this one also in just a second here, what you'll be able to do is whenever you're creating a transfer order directly from a sales line, the system now will at least keep track of the relation between those. Previously, and this is, again, kind of crazy to think that this was never there prior, you didn't really have that relation. There was no real way to connect the two without hard marking it. So now when you create a transfer order from the sales order line, we'll actually be able to see those connections, and I'll show you that in just a second here. So actually, I'm going to steal it back, and we'll just go ahead and use that same sales order that we had here. So we just created a sales order line with our approved item for Forest Wholesalers, but now what I can do from the product and supply is I can go and create a new transfer order. Now this functionality was always here to be able to create a transfer order from a sales order line, but the thing it didn't have is it didn't have the link. So when I do this, it'll create my transfer order. And now for my transfer order and for my sales order, I'll show you on both sides, I can now see what they're related to. So here I can go to inventory, I can go to related sales orders, and it tells me exactly what this transfer order line is for. Now, one of the things that the system will attempt to do here when it creates this transfer is it will attempt to mark them together, to actually do an actual physical marking against them. Now that is going to depend on your costing version, or not your costing version, but your costing method. Things like standard cost, things like moving average, those don't settle. Marking is not technically allowed in those types of costing models, for example. So in this case, it's a standard cost item in this Contoso environment. So it doesn't actually mark it, but it does keep this relation. So we can see the relation between those. Now, if I was to go back to my sales order, I can also see it from this side. I believe this one is on the product and supply menu. And down below, where'd you go? Related transfer orders right there. And then same thing, I could see the transfer order that's related to. Now I did test this a little bit, and I did test this using master planning, for example, where if I was to firm a transfer order that was pegged against a sales order, I tested that to see if it would actually create that relation. Unfortunately, it doesn't. It only does this relation when you create it directly from the sales order line. So it is fairly limited, but I at least have some hope here that Microsoft will extend this to other areas of the system as well. Okay, I'm going to pass it back to you, and we'll go through the final SCM improvements that came with 45.
Sounds good to me. There we go. Okay, so some other features that were included in 1045 here as well. The top one here is called acceptance sampling. This one feels like they were trying to get it pushed out with the advanced quality management, but it didn't quite make it in time. It is still technically in preview. So what this lets you do, with acceptance sampling, it's another type of quality control method where you can kind of use statistical analysis to evaluate batches or lots based on certain charts that you set up. So depending on your lot size, you may have a certain level that you need to meet of acceptance quality. So with these charts, you can use this with this acceptance sampling, but not quite ready for the limelight yet. So that should be coming out in one of the future releases. So currently in preview, can be tested, just not quite ready yet. Another one that's in preview as well is lean manufacturing from planning optimization. So for anybody who's been using planning optimization over the last couple of years, Microsoft has been extending the functionality with planning optimization to all the areas that legacy planning used to touch. And they've pretty much got about everything. This is kind of some of the last stuff that they weren't able to do. So lean manufacturing is now supported by planning optimization, at least in the preview version of this. Another couple things that were added on here as well is catch weight management, or any items that are enabled for catch weight. That should now work with planning optimization once this comes off preview, and step consumption as well. And by my math, that's pretty much everything that was in legacy planning. So that will now be supported by planning optimization once that gets off preview. The message processor, that's a third one there. That's just a cleanup job. Microsoft has been constantly pushing out cleanup jobs, which has been very nice because there's a lot of tables that build a lot of data, and it's nice to have those standard cleanup jobs that clean those up. So that cleans up the message processor tables.
Production control. There's one here about printing labels for MES integrations. Microsoft has been making an effort to support third-party MES systems and the integration to those. So what this one does is it actually allows you to be able to print labels from that integration that you've set up. External item identifiers to add products to orders. This one is not preview. This one you can actually use right now in 1045. What you can do, it's a parameter. You just enable it, and you just make sure you have external item identifiers set up for your customers. If you do, you can now use this separate field to enter items. You'll have an actual drop-down list of all the items that have external item identifiers to that customer, and you can actually use their external item ID to enter the items. And then finally, container line packing details. This actually adds some additional functionality to the packing that you do on the mobile device. So when you're packing on the mobile device, it can kind of become confusing about what you've packed so far, just because you're kind of presented with information as you're doing it, and then, things that you've done, it's kind of harder to go back and look at that. But now they added some additional screens to say, okay, here's what's actually in the box that you're currently working on, so you can kind of pull up an inquiry and look at that, which is really nice. But with that gets through the features that have been added with 1045.
Sounds like a plan. I believe for the last few minutes here, I'll hand things back over to Chris so he can talk to you a little bit about the general advantages of our managed services platform and answer a couple of questions that we have popping up here in the chat. So Chris, here you go.
Perfect. Thank you. Yes, and if you don't mind running the slides, there'll just be two of them here briefly. So we're going to get into questions. Hopefully you guys found this information useful. This is kind of the caliber of expertise we have on our managed services team. So, if this is something that you're looking for a managed services partner currently, I'm just going to give you a quick update, an overview of our managed services program, and then we'll get into questions. It's going to take about a minute. But really, if this is the type of expertise you're looking for and help, we're going to do 40 service updates this year, and I think we're going to be doing 10 or 12, 10, 0, 4, or 5 updates. So we do have a lot of experience, and you can benefit from that experience as we do these service updates. I'd also say, if you're on this call and you have another managed services partner now, what are they doing to prepare you for these updates? Because this is a really important aspect of your subscription with Microsoft, is to make sure you stay updated and you're always clear on what's coming out from Microsoft and how you can benefit from it. So just briefly, if you go back just one slide there real quick. Perfect. So on our managed services, we're your single source solution. We help you with ISVs, custom code. We escalate your cases to Microsoft. We're what's called a premier support for partner. So in the rare case that we actually have to get things escalated for you to Microsoft, your case goes to the front of the queue with Microsoft. That is a quite expensive option for Avantiico, but we do think that's an important feature to be able to provide to our managed services customers, and that's that premier support for partner program. We also provide a significant flexibility in how your support hours are used, not just for break fix, but minor feature consulting, enhancements and such as well. You will be assigned a dedicated contact. We have no call centers. So typically the first person you talk to is a person that can resolve your case. We have 100% US and Canadian based support teams. So for US customers, we're working when you are. We also have 18x5 optional managed services support. In that case, we are using some UK resources there. Our average experience on our team is about 10 years with D365 and the legacy versions. You can kind of see that as evidence here with Brandon and Michael, but there are many of other people as well on our team with similar experiences. We also provide holistic advice, as you can see from this call. And if you go to our YouTube channel, you can see that we do these every quarter to make sure that our customers and generally the Microsoft community knows what's coming out, because we think it's important to be able to take advantage of everything that's being included in your price you're paying for your subscription. So again, just some of the great features we have and great people we have in our managed services team. And then we just go to the next slide here. If you are interested in, and again, I mentioned this at the beginning, if you are interested in getting kind of road mapped out what you should do for the year in terms of service updates, when they should start, when you should complete by, when your busy seasons are, we're happy to help you put together that roadmap at no obligation. You just type in roadmap in the Teams chat and we'll reach out to you. Okay, great. So we have a few minutes left. We'd love to open that up for questions. Sebastian, I think you said there's a few to review, yes?
Yeah, we do have a couple here. So excellent. We'll work our way backwards. From Lana Van S, we have a question about the sales order lines that we spoke about previously. Can those operations and that functionality be done like across the entire company? across the whole setup?
I may need some additional context there. So we're talking about which part of the sales lines? We're talking about the external item IDs or creating transfer orders from the sales lines?
There's mentioned in brackets here transfers. There we go. Yeah.
So then when we're talking cross company, are we talking intercompany transactions between those, or we're talking, because the transfer is just going to be cross legal entity. I mean, the transfer orders are not going to be cross legal entity. Anytime you're dealing with multiple legal entities, you're using sales orders and purchase orders to do that. So the transfer orders aren't used there. So it's going to be between sites or warehouses when you're using this transfer order functionality.
Right. And then we have another one, a question about the electronic signatures. Are they GMP certified?
I don't think Microsoft has explicitly said they're GMP certified, so they haven't claimed that. They do call out that they're required for certain FDA requirements and other industry requirements like that, because they talk about it in reference to the quality control area of the system. But I didn't find anything that said they're GMP certified. I think they probably have the technical requirements to do that, but you'd probably have to work with your own internal team to determine if they are.
Okay. And then finally, we have a question about the mobile app v4 from Andrew here. Will the old version continue to work until they are able to upgrade to the next version of the platform?
It will. With any version, Microsoft always tries to call out a point in time when they'll stop support for it. I believe they were giving us until mid next year to upgrade. Let me see if I can find that exact date. Give me 1 second here, but I believe it was some point next year. But they'll work just fine up until that. And as we've seen before, they usually push that as it starts getting closer and closer with any other requirement that they've put on us. Okay, so what they're saying is version 3 will work up until May 2026 is the date that they're giving us currently. So we'll see if they move that.
Okay, and a quick follow-up. With a primary focus on Android-based scanners, is there any sort of differentiating factors that involve Android in this case?
No, Android was the one where you didn't really need to do anything else differently. You don't need to really change the app registrations or anything else. It's already available on Android-based ones, and they call out that May 2026 date specifically actually for Androids. So you can upgrade whenever, but you have until May 2026 on this.
Great. Well, I think unless there are any other last-minute submissions here in the chat, we have covered everybody's questions. So I'll give everyone a brief moment here to perhaps ask something quick. And if it's a bit of a lengthier question, just know that we'll get back to you via email follow-up if it requires that.
Hey, Sebastian, one thing I wanted to bring up, because I thought I had less time than I did, there are going to be a couple of features that if the audience would like them, full deck of everything, there are 2 slides that I did go over, that I did pass over because of what I thought was going to be some timing issue. But in the case of slide 16 and slide 17 talks about a cash and bank feature. While this feature is going to be coming out in slide 16, it's an automatic vendor account matching. This new feature, you will have to speak with your bank depending on the bank statement that you receive, because what it allows you to do is it allows you to automatically match to a vendor account based on that vendor's account number or their IBAN number if you deal with international vendor payments. But there has to be a specific designated area within your bank statement or a field or placeholder within the statement to be able to apply or account for that vendor's account number. So that's just something that if you do want to use that, because it will be coming out in 10.0.45, you will need to follow up with your bank about the bank statement. So that's one feature. And then the next feature on the next slide had to do with fixed asset depreciation. It allows you to do like a posting date, but it kind of works the same as the summarized depreciation. So I haven't seen a big difference when it comes to whether you use summarized depreciation or you enable that depreciation posting date. So those are just a couple of features that I didn't get a chance to go over because I thought, we were going to be running short on time. But since we have a few minutes, for anyone that does request the deck from Chris or Sebastian, just be mindful of these two features that we didn't get a chance to talk in detail about.
Mm-hmm.
And,
Yeah, we
and for any of the
understand contacting your bank can be terrifying, but it is important to do in this case.
And for any managed service customers, we'll be sending this out, I think today. I think you'll have the deck out today, and everybody else that wants it, just let us know. I think we'll probably be posting this on YouTube as well. One thing I just want to mention, just from the community aspect of this, we did get some great feedback when we did this session for 10044, which was to suggest to put this into two separate sessions, one for finance and one for supply chain. We did take that feedback, and we are still considering that. It's just for 45. There wasn't so many of them that we were going to demo. Well, in this case, I guess, Brandon, we did run out a little bit of a time. But when we were planning out the time, we didn't feel that there was going to be so long that it would warrant two separate sessions. But I do want to make sure that you guys know we did take that feedback from last time, and we are continuing to evaluate each time we do these how much content we have. So for 46, we may actually do that again, just depending on how much material there is. So I really appreciate the feedback, and if you guys have any suggestions on improving this, we'd certainly love to hear about it in the feedback as well. We will make sure these are being relevant and useful for you guys, and still thoughtful of your time, investment, and in joining us. So really appreciate it. Any other last questions?
Let's see. We have one from Andrew. Do we offer similar sessions to this presentation on the CE side of the dynamics world, or is that not something that we focus on predominantly?
Yeah, that's a good suggestion. But right now we're focused just on D365 finance and supply chain on these, and any related things, like for instance, we talked about some of the mobile application things here too. If there are impacts to the service update, such as something with dual write or something like that, we would include those things. But yeah, that's good feedback. We may consider that in the future for the CRM activities.
All right, and I think with that, we have just about tidied all of our boxes here. Thank you all for joining us for today's presentation. We hope you found it useful, and you'll be hearing from us again very soon.
Thank you, Sebastian. Thank you, Chris.
Yep.
Thanks all.
Thanks for everybody for joining. Appreciate it.